Welcome, everybody, to this Meetings of Mind, the September Meetings of Minds. I'd like to thank you all for taking time to join us, either out of your morning, your afternoon, or your evening, for what I promise will be a fascinating Meetings of Mind. Before we start on this, I'm going to just lay a few things out. First of all, this is one of my huge personal passion areas when we start to look at the impact of sports nutrition. So this is an area that I've spent the vast majority of my career dipping in and out of. The reason why I think it's fascinating, and the reason why I think you'll find it fascinating, whether or not you're involved in elite sports, recreational sports, or no sport at all, is that when we look at the impact and how food brings about changes in the most extreme circumstances, so when we're under the greatest amount of stress, we can learn from that directly what happens all the way across the spectrum, to the people who are sedentary, all the way through to the people who've just taken gold medals at the Olympics. So it gives us a fascinating insight to life at the extremes. You know, if you want to find out the capacity of a motor engine, you know, we go and look at the fastest sports cars, the Formula One cars, the fastest motorbikes. We look to see how those efficiencies work at the furthest point. And it's the exact same when it comes to human performance. We can learn so much by taking that journey. And today, you're in the hands of an extremely capable, motivated, passionate person when it comes to delving into the world of sports nutrition. Prior to my time at joining Zinzino, or even if I'm really honest, way before I'd even heard of Zinzino, I'd heard of this person, because the sports nutrition network is quite a tight-knit community. And I'd heard of this person previously with regards to their presence at conferences, sports nutrition conferences, and in fact even hosting a conference which friends and colleagues of mine had attended. So I was already aware of her work prior to knowing that she was at Zinzino. And in fact, and I may not have explained this to Ida or certainly to anybody else, but it was one of those things that gave me a real assurance about what Zinzino was all about. The fact that they had somebody of this expertise, background, and credibility as a part of their team. And so without further ado, it gives me great pride and pleasure to introduce Ida Marie Pedersen, who is going to talk this morning and take us through this fascinating topic. I'm going to do my best not to get too involved. In fact, I'll let you all into a secret. Prior to us joining this call and hosting this morning, Ida and I jumped on and were having a chat and got a bit carried away and lost sight of the clock, and then quickly went, oh, we've got to get onto that, because it's an easy conversation for us to get lost in. So I will keep an eye on questions as they come through. If you can drop them into the chat box or the Q&A, I will have a look and I'll do my best to address those questions with Ida towards the end. But otherwise, pens out, paper at the ready, get set to listen. I'll hand over to you, Ida. The stage is yours. Thank you very much. We'll all sit back and listen keenly.
Thank you very much, Colin. What an amazing introduction. And you could easily be the one who is presenting today. So maybe next time you will be able to do a sports nutrition talk for us. I have prepared a presentation for us today. I am sharing my screen. Hopefully it works. Let's see. Okay, so today the topic will be sports nutrition, and my heading for today's talk is personalized diet for optimal performance. This is such a passion to me, sports nutrition. I have been working with athletes for many years now, both within team sports, runners, bicyclists, swimmers, and so on. And sports nutrition is extremely interesting because you get to see all of those small details influencing performance and recovery. This is just a snapshot from one of the locker rooms from one of my teams that I have been working with. It's very important that when you are doing work within sports nutrition that you acknowledge and understand that you have to fuel for the work that you are performing. It's very important to adjust and time macronutrients in order to enhance performance. Because Performance in sports depends on mainly two things. It depends on genetics, of course. This we cannot really do anything about. We grow a certain time of centimeters. We have the genetic predisposition that we are born into. But what we can do something about is the amount of exercise that we perform. So exercise is really the key within performance in sports. And my job as a sports nutritionist is to make sure that the athlete recover the best way in order to be able to exercise and join the team for exercises. Recovery and the factors involved in recovery is, of course, nutrition, diet, fluids, sleep, and rest. It's not really that complicated for an athlete as well. A healthy diet for an athlete could be illustrated by the food pyramid. What is really important is that we have a foundation at the bottom with water, with fruit and vegetables, whole grain, potatoes, milk and dairy, that we include fish, eggs and meat, of course, as very important protein sources, fats and oils, and at the very top, try to avoid or at least decrease the amount of processed foods that we consume a day. This diet will be both balanced, healthy, performance enhancing, and will influence health and immune system. But the problem, as you know, is that in 2021, our diet does not contain of whole foods. It contains of food products. We eat food products. In fact, 60% of the foods that we are consuming today is what is defined as ultra-processed foods. So the foundation in our diet today, it's not healthy, it's not varied, it's not very sports performance promoting. We are consuming too much processed foods. On top of that, we find processed food, culinary ingredients such as fats and oils, and all the way at the top, what we include the least of in our diet today is the minimally processed foods. These foods are typically high in sugar, they are high in, of course, omega-6 fatty acids, they are high in salt, they are energy dense, nutrient poor, not very health and immune system promoting, low in fiber, and they are high in saturated fat. The performance pyramid, to me, is about having a solid foundation at the very bottom. We have to talk about our diet before we start talking about sports nutrition and at the very top, supplements. So the foundation should be there before we do anything else. I will get back to this pyramid a little bit later. So today I would like to speak about key nutrition strategies for maximizing performance and recovery in sports. The first is, of course, create a solid foundation. We know that today 1/3 of the world is malnourished, and this malnutrition includes both underweight, as we see in some regions of the world. It includes overweight and obesity, as we know are increasing and very prevalent in the world today in most of the countries. This, of course, includes the risk of includes the risk of many different types of lifestyle diseases, but also the third category, the type we cannot really see, linked to lack of essential micronutrients in our diet. By 2025, half of the world will be malnourished, and this applies to the athlete as well. They are also experiences lack of micronutrient intakes and macronutrient intake in their diet. My conclusion from the way we live today, the way we eat, the type of foods we consume, is that we need supplement to improve our diet. And this applies for the athlete as well. Because I see from my work with athletes that they struggle to meet their daily needs for so many different macro and micronutrients. And this is maybe a little bit strange, because if you compare one of the athletes I usually work with, they consume twice the amount of food that I am doing a day. So they eat more food, and thus they should also consume more micronutrients. But this is not necessarily the case. For us ordinary people consuming 2,000, 2,500 calories a day, this places enormous pressure of the foods that we consume, that they contain the correct amount of micronutrients. So today we are experiencing imbalances in omega-6-3 ratio, in gut microbiota, and also in relation to our essential intake of essential micronutrients. So the performance pyramid for me is, in fact, we need to talk about a balanced diet, but we know that our diet today is not balanced, and thus we will need to incorporate the health protocol for our diet, for our athletes. If we do that, then we can start talking about how to time and periodize different kinds of macronutrients, and on the top, talk about ergogenic acids or ergogenic aids, typically caffeine, beta buffers, creatine, protein powder, and so on. The first thing that we could say, and that we know, is that athletes have an inadequate intake of omega-3 fatty acids. We know that because they are humans too. They experience the same kind of challenges that we ordinary people do in our diet, where they consume too much processed foods containing a lot of omega-6 fatty acids and too little omega-3. In this way, or training in itself is causing a lot of inflammation in an athlete's body. But having this unbalanced relationship between omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acids influence the recovery. Because we know that the inside our tissue and the polyunsaturated fatty acids, they depend on what we eat, physical exercise, genetic variation, and also metabolic turnover. And this is influenced by the magnitude of how much we train and also the intensity. We know that the omega-3 index is a reliable indicator of omega-3 status in the human body. And some studies have shown, although there are not too many studies examining omega-3 status in athletes, some studies have shown that the people who run the most during a week, they have lower omega-3 index compared to runners running less. The same goes with the arachidonic EPA status. I see that I have pointed the arrow the wrong way. It should be, of course, increased AA EPA status with the magnitude of kilometers that you run. So training in itself influences the fatty acid composition in our cells. When it comes to the AA-EPA ratio, it's a biochemical biomarker of cardiovascular events. And I will try to not speak too fast because of the translators. I'm sorry for rushing a little bit, but I have so much on my mind today. Okay, so a high AA-EPA ratio, it will influence the cellular environment. So it will increase a cellular inflammation, increase the risk of cardiovascular events, and also the prevalence of depressive symptoms. So when the AA-EPA ratio goes up, it increases inflammation in the body. And there are some definitions around trying to establish what is low, moderate, elevated, and high. And the cutoff for low goes at 3, the cutoff for moderate at 6, elevated 15, elevated at 7, and then if you have a higher AA-EPA ratio above 15, you have a high risk of cellular inflammation. Omega-3 plays a very important role within sports, both when it comes to recovery and not injured athlete, but also athletes who are injured. There are studies looking at both cognitive processing, so mental capability of concentration, focusing, and so on, the muscle protein synthesis rate, MPS rate, especially if you have a low protein intake in your diet, then omega-3 is very important for making sure that your muscle either maintains or grow through this period. It's important for muscle loss, especially during mobilization. Of course, very important when it comes to inflammation and protection of oxidative stress, muscle soreness, and muscle damage. We know that the average ratio between omega-6 fatty acids and omega-3 fatty acids are above 12 to 1 in Europe, or even above 25 to 1 in the rest of the world, for example, America. In Scandinavia, people usually take a little bit more supplement than in other regions of the world, and we know that people in Scandinavia have around a balance around 7 to 1. But what we want is a balance below 3 to 1. And why is it that balance oil are working? Well, it's because it's not an ordinary omega-3 supplement. It contains also it contains olive oil, which contains a lot of polyphenols, strong antioxidants, who protects against oxidative stress in our body. So it promotes, or the olive oil in combination with omega-3 in our product is not only protecting the formulation within the bottle, it also makes sure that the formulation is utilized and reaches the cells within our organs. I have some statistics from the years I have been working with athletes. I usually see that around 50% have a balance higher than 12 to 1, which is higher than the average in Europe. And also a lot of them have, in fact, balances above 25 to 1. Very, very few, maybe 1 in 10, have a balance below 71, although they are living in the Scandinavian countries. So I would say, roughly speaking, that the athletes are somewhat even worse than the average person when it comes to balance. And I have never seen an athlete with a balance lower than 3 to 1 at baseline at the first test before introducing balance oil to an athlete. And this is quite scary, I would say, because they are dependent on having omega-3 fatty acids for recovery. Otherwise, they are more prone for injuries, don't recover as good as they should, and so on. So this is very scary numbers. Balance oil is test-based and individualized. Athletes usually differ in body weight, and of course our formulation takes care of that. Today, we have tested over 710,000 fatty acid tests, and we see that after taking balance oil for 120 days, 95% of the people doing that will have a balance below 3 to 1. The next issue and topic for the solid foundation is that athletes also have an unbalanced gut microbiota. They consume the same kind of foods that we are consuming, living in a westernized diet society where we go grab fast food or finished products, ultra-processed foods. And our gut doesn't really like that because they are dependent on fiber. If they are not fed fiber, they will starve and they will die. And the bad bacteria are taking over. So it's a constant balance between good bacteria and bad bacteria in our colon. A dysbiotic state, dysbiosis in our gut, increases the risk of diseases. It increases inflammation. It produces less short-chain fatty acids in our colon and also produces more LPS, which is not good for us. We know that 70 to 80% of our immune cells are in the gut. The athletes should also focus on fiber because we know that the average fiber intake in in general is around 20 grams a day. However, we are recommended between 25 to 35 grams a day, meaning we have a deficiency of around 10 grams. Our fiber intake is too low. You could think that being an athlete, consuming more food, consuming more energy, could also influence fiber intake, and so we don't really have to think about that. Well, that is not the case, especially not with the athletes I have been working with, because they fluctuate quite a lot when it comes to fiber intake. One day, this athlete consumed 4,100 calories and consumed around 18 grams of fiber. The other day, when it consumed 1,000 calories less, it consumed actually, or he or she consumed more fiber and too little, as I just mentioned. So when we are talking about fiber, we want to talk about not only consuming one type of fiber or maybe including a couple. We want a diversity in our fiber intake. We want to consume as many different plants as possible because we know that diversity promotes a good gut health. It influences the magnitude of different bacteria types we have in our colon. So diversity is key. We know that different kinds of fiber influence different things. So for example, the viscous fibers, they are influencing our blood sugar and also cholesterol, blood cholesterol, because these viscous fibers, they form a gel around the particles, for example, around the cholesterol, and takes away the cholesterol from or removes cholesterol from the GI tract and back to the circulation. And out, and less travels back to the circulation. Also, what is even more important for athletes are the influence of fiber, viscous fiber, on blood sugar control. The other types of fiber, the non-viscous fibers, they are influencing the bacteria in our colon and the growth of the good bacteria, and then also, of course, the production of the short-chain fatty acids. In our product, Zinzino Plus, we have focused on diversity because we know that as I told you, different kinds of fibers will influence production of different kinds of short-chain fatty acids, but also the different bacteria fermenting those fibers. And for an athlete, protection against inflammation is very, very important, of course, when it comes to the effects of fibers. The second thing I would like to stress about fiber, as I also just mentioned, is the rise in blood sugar or blood sugar control with fiber. Because body weight and body composition for athletes are two very important factors when it comes to performance. Let's say that you have an athlete that is a little bit heavier than he or she should be, then it will influence how fast you run, how tired you feel, and it will influence performance. So those two factors are extremely important when it comes to performance within sports. If you have an athlete who are not consuming fiber, it will influence the blood sugar control and blood sugar fluctuations in a day. So what you want is an athlete that have a good blood sugar control with very few or not so high spikes in the blood sugar, so that you reduce the risk of cravings between meals. That is very important. Yes, let's see. Final slide on the fiber thing is that, or not the thing, but the fiber issue is that we should recommend 2 scoops of Zinzino Plus to the athletes, because we know that is the gap between sufficient intake and insufficient or inadequate intake in the population. The third thing when we are talking about creating a solid foundation is micronutrients, of course, essential micronutrients. Those we have to get through food or supplements on a daily basis. From my work with athletes, I see that although they are consuming much more food, they don't necessarily reach their intake of essential micronutrients. And their intakes or their recommendations for athletes when it comes to micronutrients, it's not different from ordinary people like myself. So they have all the tools, or they have more food to work with, but they are not reaching their daily requirements. Especially for the ones I have listed here: vitamin C, vitamin D, folate, magnesium, selenium, iron, omega-3, of course, that is a macronutrient, and iodine. The European Food Safety Authority, EFSA, they say, okay, that there are 12 approved health claims when it comes to immune system and vitamins and minerals, 9 in total. And all of these, of course, we have in Extend and Extend Plus. For an athlete, being healthy, free from illnesses, colds, and so on, means that it can train and improve. And remember, in the beginning, I said that the 2 most important drivers for a professional athlete or a good athlete is the way we are structured from birth, like our genetics, and then how much we are able to train. So being sick all the time with colds, infections, and so on means that you won't be able to train alone or with your team, and that you are not getting as good progress as you should. Also, we know that, for example, vitamin D, as we have in Extend and Extend Plus, is very important for muscle function, and again, of course, performance, and also for reducing the risk of upper respiratory tract infections, colds. To me, yes, I had one more slide. We have a lot of other very important macronutrients as well: iron, iodine, zinc, and of course vitamin C, contributing to different bodily functions important for an athlete. For example, the first 3, they contribute to normal cognitive functions, while vitamin C is important to maintain normal immune function during and after intense physical activity. We also know that the beta-glucans we have in Extend and Extend Plus are extremely important when it comes to the period after intense physical exercise, reducing the risk of getting infections. To me, the health protocol compensates for our modern diet, and this is very important for the athlete as well. Usually we start thinking about more sophisticated, maybe tools like ergogenic acids, as I discussed in the beginning, for example, caffeine or nitrate. But the basics has to be in order first. We have to make sure that we have a solid foundation. This influences everyday performance, recovery, health, and immune system. So to me, the performance pyramid looks like this. And I hope that if you are going to remember one thing from today, it will be this slide. The second topic I would like to discuss is, of course, the next level up, the sports nutrition part, the hardcore sports nutrition. And I have a couple of tips I would like you to focus on here. First of all, when it comes to carbohydrates, much debated. Some love carbohydrates, some love them not so much. Some eat low-carb food, some eat high-carb food, and so on. But within sports nutrition, carbohydrates, they are considered to be the most important fuel when it comes to performance, especially for those who are doing longer intensity sports like running, bicycling, team sports, and so on. There are a lot of different things to talk about when it comes to periodization. I cannot really say that word right now, but when it comes to either increasing or decreasing your intake of carbohydrate per day, the rule of thumb is that you should incorporate the amount of carbohydrate based on the exercise load that you are doing. So for example, if you are training very, very high, you are going to compete in Tour de France. You train over 45 hours a day, then the recommendation is between 8 to 12 grams of carbohydrate per kilo body weight a day. Meaning that if you weigh 100 kilo, just to give an easy example, you will have to consume between 800 to 1200 grams of carbohydrates a day, which is extremely difficult to do. But usually the athletes is not even near those kinds of recommendations. Most will be between 3 and maybe even up to 7 grams carbohydrate per kilo body weight a day. So you have to try to establish how much you train, and then calculate the amount of carbohydrate that you need a day. Next up is, of course, when it comes to carbohydrates, that you have to fluctuate, you have to adjust your carbohydrate intake depending on the sessions that you are having during the week. So if you are, for example, having a very intense day on Tuesday, then you should really try to carb a little bit up before going into that session or those sessions. Because we know that if you consume an ordinary diet, you train and you deplete your carbohydrate stores, the glycogen storage in your body, then it takes around 24 hours before they are full again. If you are consuming low carb, it will take longer time. So if you have very, very hard sessions within a few days, you have to put extra pressure on consuming more carbohydrates to be able to perform at your best. Also, of course, proteins, very much debated within sports nutrition. But if I want to, or if I'm going to give you a golden rule here, it will be to focus on protein timing. A lot of people eat much protein for dinner, but we tend to forget about proteins during the rest of the day at the other meals that we are consuming. It is very important for maintaining muscle mass and also growing muscle mass, especially when we are managing weight, maybe trying to reduce our body weight. It's especially important to have a protein intake of 20 to 40 grams every 3 to 4 hours. At those times, to say it easily, our channels within our muscles are open for taking in protein. They are saturated at around 20 to 40 grams, depending on your body size, your body composition, and what you do, how active you are. So it's no point of including 80, 100 grams of protein in one meal. You should try to divide it over the course of a day. This is very important for athletes when it comes to recovery. Of course, I think about those athletes who are injured, who cannot train and get the stimulus on muscle protein synthesis. They have to really pay attention to protein. And also athletes who are managing weight, or athletes who cannot lose any muscles, who want to improve muscle mass. An example of where you find 20 grams of protein: cottage cheese, skyr or yogurt, and chicken, tuna, eggs. There are also some protein in bread, oats, lean shake, of course, and our protein bar. The third and final thing I would like to say when it comes to tips, sports nutrition tips, is a suggested protocol and talk about our supplements. So we don't have any ergogenic supplements per se that are defined as those bringing the smallest details out of a person. We have the supplements that are extremely important for overall performance, overall health, overall immune system. I hope that you understood that from my talk now, but all of these products that we have will indirectly or directly influence how an athlete is performing. Because, for example, Extend, Protect Plus, they are supporting the immune system. They bring in the essential micronutrients. Synabiotic is extremely important when it comes to weight management and gut health. And of course, we have balance. I could also include balance oil here for breakfast. Some like to take it at breakfast. A snack meal could be a lean shake with some milk to ensure the 20 grams of protein that you will need for stimulation of your muscle protein synthesis. It should also include some carbohydrate, especially if you're doing long intensity sports. And blood sugar control are obtained if you also make sure that you have a fiber source or multiple fiber source in your snack meal. The evening meal, I would personally, I like to take balance oil at evening and with the last meal I eat that day. But also Viva Plus, Extend Plus, Synogene could be incorporated within a protocol for an athlete and taken at night. Zinzino protein bars are, of course, also very beneficial when it comes to stimulating muscle protein synthesis before going to bed. So here is just an example of a protocol that you could incorporate if you are working with athletes or being an athlete yourself. Then the very last thing I would like to speak about today is Ascent. Because going into this talk, I revealed that I have been doing a study with my athletes or some of my athletes, and the product I examined was Ascent. These results have not been published yet, so I really hope that we could keep the results within this group and discuss them internally. But Ascent were given to the athletes at baseline. Here I also measured a lot of other different things. We had, of course, the balance test, but we had anthropometric measurements, we had food records, we had measurements on recovery, and so on. We included 2 different handball teams in Norway, and we included both a female handball team and a male handball team. The age was between 18 to 38 of age, and it was approximately 54% male players. The athletes were given 2 to 4 capsules a day based on their body weight. And then after 120 days, we took new measurements. Under the time course, we also did some recovery testing. We took some more anthropometric testing, but we only took 1 DBS at baseline and then after the intervention. And here is the results. So when it comes to omega-3 6:3 ratio, we experienced a 62% reduction. And we also saw 4 athletes who went under 3-to-1 imbalance, which is very good and also exciting, because I know that a lot of people have been discussing a little bit when it comes to the efficacy of Ascent. Also, when it comes to the the omega-3 index, it increased by 71%. The protection value was extremely poor at baseline. 75% of all the athletes had 0 in protection value. And then after 120 days, the athletes improved, or 9 out of 10 athletes improved protection value. And the protection value increased by 250%, which is amazing. The arachidonic acid was elevated at baseline. And you remember I discussed the arachidonic and EPA balance prior in my presentation, but 2/3 of the athletes had elevated arachidonic acid at baseline. And after the intervention with Ascent, this was reduced by 23%. The AA-EPA ratio was very high, above 15 at baseline. But now, after 120 days, it went down on average to be moderate. And we had a 63% reduction in the AA-EPA ratio. And this is very important when it comes to athletes, as I have discussed, in terms of the cellular environment and inflammation. Training in itself is causing a lot of inflammation, and now being able to reduce the AA-EPA ratio among these athletes are extremely important. So Ascent, more details will come when we are publishing this study, but Ascent improved omega-6-3 balance, improved protection value, it improved the arachidonic acid, it improved the omega-3 index, and also the AA-EPA ratio. That was what I wanted to discuss. I sometimes think about our product as athletes, because athletes, they have a very unique composition as our product do, and they are constantly looking for improvements and to taking the next step. So thank you very much for listening to me and my presentation today. And maybe there are some questions.
Definitely. Thank you very much, Ida. I've actually just been sat making a load of notes myself of things that we can discuss now and discuss later, but I'm going to open up. I mean, you've covered a lot there, Ida. There's a ton of information that covers a broad spectrum. And so I think that's reflected in some of the questions that we've come through. So if you don't mind, I'll pick up a few of those and then maybe explore a few of my own questions, if that's all right.
Yeah.
So first one, this is an interesting one. And I'd be interested in your take on this, because I might have a slightly different response to this. But Ursula has asked, and this comes up a lot with regards to protein sources and vegans. And that there is much debate around the absorption rates, that they're different, that they vary, that they're not close to 100%. First of all, before we champion into anything else, it's very rare that any source of protein has 100% absorption rate. So that's not isolated to purely vegan considerations. And then there's this notion that the leftovers are transformed into, and I really don't like this phrase, Ursula, cell garbage, but I think I know what you mean. So I guess your question is, with regards to protein, and this is in the context of vegans, if a person is consuming, if they're looking for a range of different types of protein sources, I guess it's about that notion of, how much of it can the body make use of, and how much of it is just going towards waste. What are your thoughts on that, Ida?
I think it's a very good and maybe also a good question, and maybe a little bit of a complicated area, because if you are going to make sure that you always consume the most bioavailable protein sources, then perhaps you will miss a lot of other beneficial factors with other kinds of foods. Mm-hmm. So if you are simply trying to maximize protein utilization by consuming animal sourced diet or animal sources, protein sources, then perhaps you will miss a lot of fibers, phytonutrients, antioxidant from the colorful plant-based sources to protein. So it's a little bit difficult, but yes, of course, the animal sourced protein sources are better at being utilized in the body, but it depends. The body also kind of influence and mediate itself, being able to turn on or off the magnitude of absorption for a number of different macro and micronutrients that we consume.
Yeah, I'd agree with the main point that you're making there. And I think a lot of times the real issue around, taking a vegan approach, it's not really down to the food source itself. So providing you have a sufficient amount of proteins that are derived from vegan plant-based sources, then you're going to be able to optimize your protein synthesis. So you're going to help the body to repair and remold and improve. The real issue is availability. and looking at that, the diversity that's required, and then obtaining that in the shopping basket. That's the real challenge, if we're going to be honest about it. So I think because of that, a lot of misinformation has crept in with regards to absorption. More often than not, those whole foods, those plant-based sources are actually going to provide a lot more bang for buck than an isolated protein that's just derived from meat. So I think, I'd worry less about the waste and focus more upon the diversity and how you can achieve that through the diet. And then, the good thing now is that there are opportunities to add to that through kind of vegan supplementation. But I think that's one of those areas where there's an opportunity to enhance the diet. And here's a good one for you, Ida, based off what you were just discussing. Why do athletes have a lower EPA-AA ratio? They want to know, did they understand it correctly, that the difference was whether they run fast or longer? This, Ida and I were discussing this prior to this meetings of mine. Over to you, Ida.
Yeah. Okay. So first of all, is that they have a lower AA to EPA ratio, and this was in that study that I mentioned, and it was linked to the amount of kilometers that you run. So if you run 60 kilometers a week, then you would have a higher AA to EPA ratio compared to those, for example, running 20 kilometers a week. And we discussed this. This is why we were a little bit late into this call, because we discussed what this means in this study, what are results from the SENT study, what is really going on when you are having a group of people, athletes, starting to take a supplement. They are depleted in omega-3. What is going on within the blood and what is going on within the muscle? Where do you take the measurements? What is going on? What kind of fuel are they starting to use? I think that if I were to try to give some conclusions from my study or our study on Ascent, I would say that having this great decrease in AA, and not as high, but having an increase in omega-3 index, I think that if we were to follow those athletes for a year, we would see other kinds of results than we see now. So I think that when you have an athlete going through a transition or a normal or ordinary person, it takes a little bit of time. There are different things happening at different time points. And we have to try to get the full picture by not only seeing at 4 months, but also maybe after a year.
Yeah, and that's a key part. I think that, and this is really where the literature, the research needs to go, is there's a lot of powerful statements that are readily available that show the benefits to be had when an athlete is above 8% with regards to their index and has a good less than 4-to-1 ratio. What I think there's a lack of, and this is where Ida's work will no doubt contribute, is that understanding of the mechanism and the road, the process, and the time it takes to bring about that change. Because what you need to recognize is that exercise, brings about a huge stimulus of stress on the body on a daily basis. And so when you look at increased distance in kilometers per week, what we're looking at is increased exposure time of stress. And this prompts certain inflammatory markers to do their job. And so that there is a net effect of that. And then also changes and adaptations metabolically to how the body is using these things as a fuel within those instances. So I think this is a real area that we are going to only gain more and more insight around as we continue our reading, but more importantly, as Ida continues her research and investigations down this route. Let me pick up a couple more, if I can just keep you for a couple more minutes, Ida. There's so many questions. Let's have a look. So this one's an interesting one. Children who are training a lot, that's hard to quantify, but children who are training a lot, should they spread their protein intake across the day?
Yes. is my initial answer. Children growing very fast, much faster than us adults. We have stopped to grow, but growing fast puts an extra pressure on, of course, what we consume and what we eat. So having I struggle to find the English word, but having meals at the same times throughout the day is both very beneficial when it comes to stability for that child, but also, of course, making sure that we have a constant fuel for our muscles, the bones, and so on. So in the protein sources, you also usually, if we talk about animal-based, you also find calcium, which are extremely important for our bone health during childhood and adolescence. And other very important micronutrients such as iodine being extremely important. We have vitamin D in some enriched dairy sources, all very influential for the child. So yes, I would say that it's a good idea to periodize the intake of protein. But also I would like to say that we should never start to count calories or count grams when it comes to children. We shouldn't do that as adults as well, but especially don't put that pressure on your child, please.
Absolutely. And the other thing I'd add to that question is, if your athlete is doing a lot of sport, and especially if you think your child is going to develop into, a good athlete and maybe a professional athlete, what we like to inherit are athletes, humans with really good eating behaviors, so that they are used to having a diverse diet that's fundamentally based on whole foods, that they have a really healthy mindset about variation, the types of foods that appear at different opportunities throughout the day. And I can't echo and I cannot support that statement anymore. Do not teach your child to count calories. Do not do that. Don't burden them with that. It hasn't worked for anybody else. It won't work. For the definition of insanity is to repeat the same process and expect a different outcome. And we've been teaching people for decades to count calories, and it's not worked. So don't do it to your children. All right, let's have one more question, Ida, and then I promise that we'll let you go. Here's an easy one. I'll do this one, then I'll ask you one more. First of all, they've given out a huge thanks for your inspiring speech, and then they've asked, are the products approved by WADA? Our products are all Informed Sport certified, which is the highest level of certification there is. It is the requirement from WADA to ensure there's no cross-contamination and that the products are safe and effective. So a resounding yes to that. So let me ask you one more question before I let you escape. So here's one. This is a more general one. Would people who exercise regularly but not considered athletes, and I'm asking this because Ida and I were discussing this earlier as well, so maybe 1 hour per day, 5 to 6 days a week, a moderate to high level, struggle to get in balance with the standard amount of balance oil, would they need to increase their dosage to see a shift?
Yeah, this is a good question, and I can't really answer that because we haven't done the study. So if we were to do an intervention based on you, we would get the answer. But my guess is that if you are training, being a recreational active individual, then you will get in balance by using balance oil. I am doing the same. I'm training for approximately 1 hour a day, every single day of the week running. And I got in balance after just 4 months, the standard protocol. So I think that increased dosage or higher recommendations, those are probably more applicable to professional athletes training twice the amount, 3 times the amount than we recreational active individuals do.
Yeah, it's a great question because we were discussing that. Ida is going to go full on to investigate that whole area. It's a fascinating area for consideration. My only tip would be is to, whenever anybody starts taking balance oil, is to take the recommended dose, do your test and your retest, and see what the results are. Because it could be that you need to increase a little bit, but also, because as a sports nutritionist, as someone who's functioned within the sports space, I'm obsessed with efficiencies. So it could be that once you get in balance, let's say that takes 120 days, or let's say it takes double that time. It's because it can, there is individual variance. Once we get there, we should be a little bit of a scientist with ourselves. And we should say, okay, what do I need now to take on a daily basis to maintain this? Because we're going to maintain it forever, for life. So where do I need to place that? And it could be that during the winter months, during times of increased physical demand, work demand, we take it up a little bit to maintain that. Just the way you think the rest of your diet. If you've been more active throughout a day, you're going to have an increased appetite and you're probably going to consume a little bit more food. So if we're doing more, we're taking on more, we're under greater stress, then we might want to upregulate. And if we're not, if we're really managing through, it could be that we're going to downregulate a little bit to make sure we ensure balance. So I would encourage you all, with that test opportunity, pre and post, become a scientist about yourself, become fascinated with how you respond. And it'd be interesting as well, maybe we can further down the road have platforms like this where people share their insights and what they experienced. But for sure, with regards to the research and the research that Ida is about to undertake, that's the huge question for us. So I'm going to wrap this session up. Ida, thank you. I knew that was going to be a great session. So much information in there. People, this has been recorded. It'll be shared. I would encourage you to watch it again and again. Share it wide and far. More and more people are fascinated and interested in the impact that nutrition has with regards to exercise, sports performance. So please do, switch on to this, share it amongst those people who you think it's going to matter to most. We will be back, another meetings of minds, in a month's time, the 14th of October, which is a little bit different. So on the 14th of October at 2 p.m. CET, Dr. Paul Clayton is going to be our host, and he's going to open the floor to me. I'm going to be presenting some insights and information from my perspective with regards to nutrition. And we will nail on a specific subject of what that's going to be about, and we'll share that information as soon as possible. So I'm going to get myself ready. I'm going to be grilled and interrogated, no doubt, by Paul, who's for sure going to ask me really difficult questions. And please do join us then. Bring your friends and bring your questions too. Until then, thanks again, Ida. Incredible. Everybody, stay well, stay safe, stay healthy, keep changing lives, and we'll see you.